So like money is a fundamental tool for building everything that we consider to be modern civilization, like whether people like it or not, like that is the thing. So, and then let's go deeper into like what it means for trust. So, there's a great book that goes through this called the Mystery of Capital, by this really legendary guy, really well regarded economist, very deep thinker, Hernando de Soto, and who's actually, by the way, I'm pretty sure he's Venezuelan by background, which is kind of ironic, bittersweet given what's happening in Venezuela right now. He talks about which is for full socialism and now is going into the classic kind of meltdown. But anyway, he talks in his book about mystery capital. He says basically, if you go to the deep foundations of what made the modern world possible, he said the big economic turning point was clear title to land. It was the ability to actually own land. And it was the ability to own land knowing that it wasn't going to get arbitrarily taken away from you, right? Because if you have clear title to land, then you have a motivation to improve the land, right? And you have motivation to turn the land into a farm or to be able to build a house or to be able to build an office building or, do whatever, an airport or whatever it is, the things that people do with land. And basically what he said is that was the turning point for what we consider to be modern civilization. Clear title to land, and then once you have ownership of land, it's the core asset, like it's the foundational asset. And then once you have clear title to land, you can borrow against the value of the land. And what he basically shows is that basically everything else that happened in the economy that resulted in the consumer cornucopia that we're all surrounded by today is a consequence basically of originally being able to borrow against land value. It's borrowing against land value that made businesses possible, right? It made investment in business, made R&D possible, right? The whole idea of being able to, employ engineers to work on a project, like it was only possible once you could actually, basically unlock capital by borrowing against the value of land. And so anyway, I go through this to basically say there's a very deep thing here, which is this concept of ownership, like this concept of ownership, this concept of title, this concept of assets, this combination, this sense of like I can actually own something and it's real, and if I do nothing, I will own it in perpetuity. And then at any point, I'm in a market economy, I can sell it, I can realize the value. That inspires people to start to think very kind of creatively about the kinds of things they might want to own, or that they can borrow against it, and they can start to start unlocking other value and investing in things. And so I just think and again, this is the deep kind of interpretation of the original sin of the internet. Like there was no ownership. Like there was just no ownership. There was no ability to have a claim on anything. Like Web 1.0, like it's actually, you could own a domain name. Like that's the closest we got, was that you could own a domain name. Right. And by the way, like some domain names are actually like very valuable and have turned into real assets, and people have retired on the basis of domain names that they own. And so that was like an early signal flare.
And by the way, that was, and I would also argue, Mark, that owning the domain name was pretty much the linchpin of how we kept Web 1 decentralized, right? Because you could, if your hosting provider messed with you, if your email provider messed with you, you could switch, right? It was the ability to switch. That one little, it was actually a really interesting architectural fact of Web 1. It was sort of, DNS was the original blockchain. It was the one thing you could own. And we kept, my view of it is we kept overloading it. And then it's a longer conversation, but tried again with RSS in 2008. And it just wasn't. Right. It just, in the end, a domain name, in my view, is not a consumer product. It's $8 a year. You got to be a semi-programmer, and that was the moment at which Web 1 kind of just started losing, because DNS could only be overloaded so many times. Longer story, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so there's a counterfactual. So people may remember, Chris mentioned RSS. So, right, RSS was basically an open protocol to do blogging, which basically turned into social networking, right? So, basically Twitter started out as a microblog. And so there was an open protocol for blogging called RSS. And like there's a counterfactual universe. There's what they say in the Marvel, there's a multiverse. There's a shard of the universe that we're not in which RSS had basically Bitcoin, right? Or where RSS had crypto, where RSS had value. And then you would have had an alternate world in which this entire world of social networking and user-generated content would have gotten built out completely differently in an open model.
Well, and and you had identity, namespace, follow, that all that stuff, right? That's when Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, stepped in and said, "Hey, we'll do that for you," because there was no way to do it in the open internet, right? How do you store your friend list in the open internet, like without a company back then, right? You didn't have a blockchain. Sorry.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. And so basically, like this is the opportunity to do that. Like we finally have the technology to be able to do that. We finally have the technology to be able to go deep, to be able to establish trust, to be able to establish money, to be able to establish incentives, and then to be able to establish prices. And I think there's a natural intellectual instinct to basically say that, if it's capitalism, it's bad and evil. And I guess I would just really encourage people to read the book, The Mystery of Capital, and to think hard about the fact that actually there's a lot of virtue and a lot of positive things that come out of being able to actually start to have real incentives and real prices. And we're right on the cusp of being able to reinvent the internet around those ideas.